Okay, today I'm going to be switching out the internals of a toilet angle stop. I already have the water off. I've already verified that all the water is off multiple times, drained the water elsewhere, and actually I've already opened it to drain what's sitting in the line right up here. So there's nothing in the water right now, but we'll just pretend that there is. After the pressure is off, there's not really that much holding it. It should unscrew fairly easy once you get it started. I like to make sure that it can wiggle around a bit. Now, I've already had this line open and apart before starting to record this video. But if you have not had it apart yet and you are sure the water is off, again, make sure it can wiggle around a bit, make sure you're not getting water spraying out. You can take a vacuum hose and set it there to catch it when you unscrew this. One other thing I will mention if you're using a vacuum is when you actually pull that out and start getting some water, if you just sit it up there in the empty hole, it'll keep sucking water from the pipe forever because the pipe is very seldom going to completely drain where it's totally dry. So you probably just want to try to catch the water rather than try to suck it out, because one's a whole lot harder than the other. Anyway, once we unscrew this, you can see we're still getting a little dribble. The old angle stop internal is completely missing the rubber on the end of that plastic. So we're just going to swap these out, and it should swap fairly easy. It's a little stuck. I'm going to take a screwdriver and pop it out from the inside. Now, sometimes the screw will sit flush with the end like that on the old ones, and the new one will be recessed in there. That shouldn't really make a difference. It should all still work normally, work perfectly fine. So we have our old one, and we have our new one. And you can see, like I was saying before, the new one, the screw is a little fatter, so it will not quite look the same when you're all put back together, but it should work just fine. And we have our brass piece from the previous, or the existing angle stop. You're just going to take that, go in there, like so. It's going to be recessed into the hole. That's perfectly fine. It's all held together by an O-ring. Things should work out great. Another thing to mention, you should try to peek inside when you get the chance. Make sure there's there's not too much crud built up around that seat where that rubber sits. Otherwise, you're going to be back real shortly replacing it again and probably switching out that entire thing. And I have kind of scraped around with a screwdriver a little bit. I don't think there's anything on this one really, so we should be good to go. We'll see how it goes. Okay, I've added a little bit of plumbing grease onto the threads to make this thing go in a little easier, or come out a little easier next time. I'm just going to take this, kind of hold it where it doesn't topple off, where the end doesn't fall out, get it lined up, and stick it into the hole. Sorry about that, I needed two hands to go in to get it lined up. Anyway, I got the thread started. I'm gonna get it hand tight first, and crank down on it with the wrench a little bit. Doesn't have to be super duper tight, but at the same time, you want to make sure it seals. And that plastic should act as sort of a PVC gasket of sorts, or a plastic gasket of sorts. Should cinch down and hold everything and keep water from leaking out. Now I am going to check the diaphragm under here because we first came up here because the toilet was continuously flushing. And I suspect that little rubber piece that blocks the water back here when you tighten that has, we saw it came off, and it's probably sitting in here interfering with how the diaphragm works. So we're going to fix that. Okay, let's see what we have. A little bit of water. Nothing in there. And I'm going to need two hands again. Okay, I got this broke loose. Let's see what we find. Oh, hey, look at that. Lots of different pieces from that rubber stopper. we'll get that cleaned out, get it back together, and see how we do. Well, I got the pieces out that I could see. Unfortunately, it's not all of it, so hopefully there's not still a big chunk hiding somewhere, like between here and here. But we'll see what happens when it gets turned back on. And try our luck. One last thing that I'll mention after I've gotten it all back together. I have turned this off before I turn the main water back on, because that thing now has new internals, so it should work. Let's see how we did. One other thing I'll mention, I've turned this off. I've also turned off every plumbing fixture that I had turned on to drain things earlier, just before I even started working on this. So I'll turn the main water supply on back out in the hallway, and then I'll go about venting the lines, and then after I've got all the lines vented, I will see how we did on this. Okay, I've turned the water on elsewhere in the floor. I've gotten the air out of the lines. I've turned this back on. It does not seem to be dripping. The previous diaphragm was replaced maybe a month or so back, and it looked pretty good, so I left it in. I have another one with me I could have replaced it with if it was still having trouble, but after flushing it a number of times, it seems to have gotten into sort of a normal flushing. So I think we're done here. I'm back at the workbench now. Just figured I'd have one last little bit of stuff before I pack this up. For the structure of how this thing works, you have, of course, a rubber, well, you're supposed to have rubber on the end of here that stops the water from coming out the wall. But if you're ever screwing one of these things and it starts dribbling out from the screw hole, well, there's an O-ring on the inside of here, which typically we just replace the internals, or this entire thing. But just for you to diagnose what's going on with it, I'm going to take this apart and show you what it looks like. So when you screw this thing in, it's reverse threaded, so what it actually does is it's shoving this part out. And having taken it apart, here are all the little pieces. There's the O-ring, that is what stands between you and getting dribbles out the screw hole.